20 years ago, gates to other worlds, known as dungeons, appeared. At the same time, only 1% of the population awakened special skills. Following these events, an adventurer's guild was created for those who wished to challenge the dungeons. A boy is seen registering at the adventurer's guild to become an adventurer. He's told that he doesn't have any skills and is asked if he's sure he wants to continue. The protagonist replies yes and asks them to please register him. He overhears a girl saying that she also wants to register, even though she doesn't have any skills either. The protagonist is shocked that someone else is as crazy as him. A C-rank adventurer named Fukumoto-san offers to show the newbies how things work around the guild. Adventurers are ranked from F to S. In the next scene, the girl asks the protagonist why he wants to become an adventurer despite having no skills. He explains that his parents disappeared when he was younger, and he needs money to take care of his sister. One day, he came home to find his sister unconscious. After rushing her to the hospital, she was diagnosed with incompatible skill syndrome. She awakened a skill that is slowly eating away at her own body. The protagonist plans to collect valuable items and magic stones from dungeons to pay for her treatment, which will cost around 500 million yen. The girl is moved by his story. The two of them approach a building where they meet their senior adventurers. The seniors explain that they'll be entering a dungeon for hands-on experience. The seniors enter the portal first, followed by the girl. The protagonist then reveals that, although the guild claims he doesn't have any skills, he actually possesses a hidden ability that doesn't show up on their radar. He has the power to access the magic from his previous life in exchange for skill points. Magic acquired this way can be used without consuming MP. He plans to level up using this method to regain the powerful spells he once had. The protagonist was reincarnated. In his past life, he excelled at magic and was known as the solitary archmage. However, he considers this life with his sister far more important. He wants to become even stronger than before so he can afford her treatment. Later in the dungeon, the seniors show off their abilities, trying to impress the protagonist and the girl. However, their real plan is to avoid teaching them anything. Suddenly, a monster charges at the girl, but a random column collapses onto it. No one understands what happened, but the protagonist stands with his hand resting on his sheathed sword. The group finally reaches the dungeon boss chamber. A system window appears. First condition: arrive at the boss chamber without taking any damage. Fulfilled. Second condition: bring 2 newcomers. Fulfilled. Third condition: bring someone who has yet to awaken a skill. Fulfilled. All 3 conditions have been met. Suddenly, the dungeon summons an extra boss. The door seals behind them. The seniors panic and try to flee. The girl, terrified, asks the protagonist if the seniors can defeat the bosses. He responds that he's not sure, but they have to believe in their abilities. The seniors begin losing the fight. The protagonist charges forward to face the dungeon boss and tells the senior adventurers he has a plan to win, urging them to listen closely. The protagonist's powerful hidden skill is called Forbidden Restriction. In exchange for being able to use magic without consuming MP, all the spells he knew from his previous life have been sealed. Once he frees himself from these restrictions, he will be able to surpass even his former self. The senior adventurer, Fukumoto-san, doesn't believe the protagonist is a newbie and suspects he lied about his status due to the way he moves in combat. The protagonist tells him they'll talk about it later, but for now, he wants Fukumoto-san to distract the dungeon boss for 3 minutes. The protagonist then approaches a girl and says he needs her help too, asking her to sit still. He puts his hand inside her shirt, raising eyebrows as it definitely looks like sexual harassment. However, he is actually manipulating her magic circuits to allow her to cast magic. She begins to glow with a radiant aura. The protagonist tells her she can now use magic and says he'll have to put his faith in her since he can't use magic yet. The dungeon boss is about to take out another senior adventurer, prompting the protagonist to urge them to hurry. He instructs the girl to repeat after him and to hold her hands toward the dungeon boss. She shouts, "Crimson Lotus Fireball." A massive blast erupts, killing the boss. She thanks the protagonist for his help. A door lifts, revealing a bright red crystal. A system window appears, announcing that the protagonist has leveled up and received the title Reincarnated Archmage. Stats: Attack 42, Defense 35, Endurance 34, Agility 37, HP and MP 150 each. After the dungeon boss was defeated, they returned to the surface and called for emergency assistance. The 3 senior adventurers all survived but were badly injured. The protagonist waits at the Adventurers Guild, anticipating the detailed analysis from his guild card. The guild card records every monster a person has defeated, which is how adventurers are properly compensated for clearing a dungeon. A man from the Adventurers Guild's General Affairs Department returns with both the protagonist's and Amamissen's guild cards. He hands them back but requests to question them about the extra dungeon boss that appeared. A flashback begins from when they were still in the dungeon. The protagonist asks Amamissen not to tell the guild how he activated her magic and wants to keep it their secret. She gladly agrees, but in return, requests to become the protagonist's disciple. The protagonist declines, saying he's refusing because she doesn't seem cut out to be an adventurer based on how she reacted in the dungeon. He doesn't want to irresponsibly teach her magic and send her to her death. She says it's a pity, but he might be right and she'll think about other options. The scene cuts back to the present. Amamissen explains that the dungeon boss was already injured and weak when she delivered the final blow. The man from the General Affairs Department believes their story and rewards both of them for defeating the extra dungeon boss. The protagonist receives 250,000 yen, and Amamissen receives 3 million yen. The rule is that 75% of the reward goes to the person who dealt the final blow, while the remaining 25% is split among the other party members. If they had been in a clan, the money would have been divided evenly. Before leaving, the man says he expects more from them in the future. The protagonist replies that they'll do their best. Amamissen tells the protagonist that she doesn't want to keep the money and believes he deserves it since he helped her, but he declines. He says she played her part and that he doesn't want the guild questioning why he received her share. They agree, exchange contact information, and part ways. The protagonist sits on his couch, looking at the 250,000 yen check. It's enough to cover a month's rent in a single day. The Adventurers Guild pays well. Just then, he gets a message from his little sister saying she feels better and managed to eat a few cups of pudding. Fired up, he swears to grow stronger and earn 500 million yen for her treatment. He suddenly remembers he leveled up and gained some skill points. A system window pops up, announcing that he has reached level 10 and can now summon a management fairy. Suddenly, a tiny fairy appears, visibly upset with him for skipping training for 20 whole years. Confused, he asks why she's mad, and she explains that he created her in his past life. A fairy designed to manage the forbidden restriction technique. Her sole mission is to make him the strongest. The fairy explains that she's upset with him for not training for the past 20 years. The protagonist doesn't remember creating her in his previous life, and she tells him that a part of his memories must be missing. He says he doesn't remember his death but recalls growing weaker each day due to an incurable disease. The fairy says she was born after his death and doesn't say much more. The protagonist suspects that his former self probably limited what she is allowed to say. He asks how she can make him stronger, and she replies that it can be done by updating the forbidden restriction skill. She then activates a new system window called Item Trade. The fairy explains that, with this system, he can retrieve any item his past self acquired at any time. However, the items are limited by stock. The protagonist wonders if that includes his item box from his past life as an archmage. The fairy confirms it does. She adds that he was quite the collector and has an abundance of rare items that can be retrieved. Though in disbelief, the protagonist is intrigued, until the fairy says there's a fee tied to the trading conditions. He opens the item trade window and begins browsing. He sees a holy sword, a demon sword, and then realizes he can obtain the omnipotent elixir, which instantly heals all illnesses and injuries. However, the price is steep, 500 million yen for 5 bottles. The protagonist feels uneasy but accepts that he'll just have to earn the money. It motivates him. The fairy then shares one last piece of news. While he was fighting the dungeon boss, She secretly placed a buff on him that doubles his experience points when defeating powerful enemies. Now understanding everything, the protagonist resolves to use the forbidden restriction skill to its fullest potential. The fairy is pleased. The protagonist then asks for her name, but she says she doesn't know. He never gave her one. He begins to think and decides to name her Sphere. She's happy with the name. The next day, the protagonist joins a D-rank dungeon party through the Adventurers Guild. As an F-rank, he's just there to fill out the numbers. The party includes 3 C-rankers. One of the members comments that F-rankers don't get any loot since they don't have any skills. The protagonist replies that he'll make up for his lack of skills. As they prepare to enter the portal, the protagonist notices one of the members has an ominous look on his face. The next scene shows the group fighting monsters. One monster is about to breathe fire, but the girl adventurer doesn't notice. The protagonist jumps in front of her and defends against the monster. He has a flashback to when he was in his apartment using his points to equip an enhanced skill. Receiving skills from the forbidden restriction doesn't consume MP, meaning he can use enhanced skills whenever and wherever he wants during close combat fighting. The scene cuts back to the present, where the protagonist is battling the monster. He uses a skill called Sonic Impact and obliterates it. A system window appears, stating that he gained 2 experience points and has leveled up. Everyone in the party is shocked by what they just witnessed. One of the C-class members questions the protagonist, asking how he's so strong without a skill. The protagonist replies that he just acquired it yesterday. The girl then thanks him for stepping in and saving her earlier. Some of the party members aren't too happy, knowing they'll now have to evenly split the loot and profit. However, another member is glad because they'll complete the dungeon faster. One member apologizes for being rude earlier about his comment that F-rankers can't get loot. The protagonist brushes it off and says it's okay, admitting he should have spoken up about having skills. However, he purposely kept it a secret, knowing they probably would have declined his request to join the party. The dungeon proceeds smoothly, and they subjugate the dungeon boss. The protagonist is now level 17. The party members are ecstatic that the raid was such an easy win thanks to the protagonist's strength. As they decide to head back to the Adventurers Guild, one of the party members is suddenly pierced in the chest by a red, glowing dagger. It's the member with the ominous expression. He smiles in satisfaction after killing his teammate. The adventurer with the glasses is angry and attacks the party member who killed their colleague. He tells the protagonist and the other female member that he'll handle the traitor himself. The protagonist looks at the evil adventurer and senses that his red dagger is a dangerous weapon. A system window appears. Item name, Bloody Knife. Attack, 200. Agility, 100. Effect, Murderous Impulse. Plus 5 attack for every human slain. Note, there is no limit to this effect. The attack increase is cumulative based on the number of victims. The adventurer with the glasses charges at the evil party member. As they fight, he realizes the traitor isn't a C-class adventurer. He had hidden his true, higher-ranking class. Suddenly, the evil member appears behind him and stabs him in the chest. Wounded, the adventurer with the glasses pulls out a potion that was gifted to him by the teammate who died. He drinks it, and a sudden surge of energy erupts from his body, blasting the evil member away. However, the power isn't enough. The traitor uses an ability called Silent Step and attacks the adventurer with incredible speed from all sides. Just as the adventurer with the glasses is about to be killed, the female party member fires an arrow at the traitor. He dodges it and speeds toward her. Grabbing her, he says he'll kill her first for interfering with his prey. Before he can strike, the protagonist stops the dagger from piercing her. She's shocked to see him protecting her. The protagonist then activates his mana and uses an ability called Sonic Impact, declaring that he's going to take the battle seriously. The evil party member dashes toward the protagonist and attacks. The protagonist blocks the strikes, but then the evil member increases his speed and vanishes. Circling around the protagonist at incredible speed, the evil member thinks his chances of losing are non-existent, but the protagonist can follow his every movement and counterattacks. The evil member is shocked, unable to understand how the protagonist can keep up with him. He stares at the protagonist, no longer believing he's just a newbie. Now, he sees the monstrous aura and the infinite strength the protagonist possesses. Desperate, the evil member retreats and charges toward the girl party member, hoping to kill her and level up his dagger. But the protagonist appears behind him in an instant and pierces his body. The evil member collapses, unable to move. The protagonist tells him that he blocked the flow of mana, so he can no longer use any of his skills or abilities. The evil member tells the protagonist to end the battle and kill him, but the protagonist says he sympathizes with him, just a little, because he, too, couldn't escape the curse of wanting to grow stronger. He says he won't kill him, but suddenly, the evil member grabs his own blade in an attempt to kill himself. The protagonist knocks him out before he can and says he must atone for his sins before he's allowed to die. The protagonist then turns to the girl party member and apologizes for scaring her, assuring her that she's safe now. She blushes and thanks him. In the next scene, the police officers arrest the evil party member. The adventurer with glasses is crying while thanking the protagonist for saving him. He then tells the protagonist that the other party member who was stabbed first didn't die but was badly injured. The dagger didn't hit a vital spot. In the following scene, the girl party member is sitting next to the protagonist and wants to know the secret to his strength. The protagonist brushes off the question and asks why she's working as an adventurer at her age. She replies that she's actually older and still in high school. The protagonist realizes she's older than his younger sister. She asks for his number, and the protagonist agrees. She then suggests they enter another dungeon together next time. He teases her, saying only if he has time. In the next scene, the protagonist has just gotten out of the shower and receives more texts from his younger sister, saying she's been okay, but the nurse got mad because she's been playing video games all day. Suddenly, the protagonist's fairy, named Sphere, appears. She says she added a hidden dungeon key to the item exchange, and the protagonist is shocked by what she said. Sphere says it's a key to a super difficult solo dungeon that only allows the protagonist to enter. The protagonist pulls up his item exchange and notices there are a lot of half-price discounts on dungeons labeled from D to S rank. The fairy says she created some discounts to encourage the protagonist to buy things. She tells him to hurry up and pick a dungeon so he can start leveling up faster. He thinks about which one to select, and the fairy tells him that the monsters in these dungeons are far more difficult to kill, but he will reap greater rewards for slaying them. She also mentions that the protagonist can sell dungeon items in the item exchange to break even when purchasing solo dungeons to conquer. The protagonist decides to choose the C-rank dungeon. A door with a purple, ominous aura appears. He says he's going inside and thanks the fairy, confident that he'll grow stronger in no time because of her help. He enters the door. In the next scene, the protagonist's sister coughs up blood and suddenly collapses to the floor. She weakly calls for her brother as she's about to faint. The scene then shifts to the protagonist in a forest. He uses the ability Haste to leap into the air and scout the area. He notices the environment feels familiar, just like in his previous life, and spots a monster he recognizes. They're incredibly fast and yield more EXP when defeated. The protagonist is running after the monster and realizes he can't keep up in his current state. Then Sphere appears and explains that she can manifest in solo dungeons since they are prepared specifically for him, unlike other dungeons in the outside world. Sphere tells him to lure the fast monster into another monster's habitat. Itzenia is a plant-type monster that devours everything. The protagonist understands and agrees to the plan. As he runs, a herd of monsters follows close behind. As the fast monster approaches the Itzenia's habitat, it suddenly slows down. It has run out of fuel. The protagonist attempts to catch it, but an Itzenia appears beneath them and devours both. A system window pops up, announcing that the protagonist has leveled up. Suddenly, a burst of fire erupts from inside the monster's mouth, killing it instantly. The protagonist walks out of the monster's mouth and finds himself surrounded by the monsters that were chasing him earlier. As a lizard-type monster prepares to attack, the protagonist activates his Enhance ability, then finally unleashes his magic. He casts Crimson Lotus Fireball, incinerating the entire area and killing all the monsters. He levels up an additional 20 times. The status window now shows level 52, HP/MP 408, attack 111, defense 97, endurance 92, agility 99. The protagonist opens the item exchange system to collect all the monster drops. He notices he's gathered a large number of rare items. The fairy tells him that if he sells the lizard steel, he can earn millions. Realizing this, the protagonist understands he can make a lot of money this way. However, Sphere warns that there is only one key per dungeon level, so not all dungeons can be exploited for profit in the same way. The protagonist decides to raid a B-rank dungeon next to acquire even more rare items. Suddenly, his thoughts are interrupted as the dungeon boss appears. The recommended level to raid this boss is 150. Despite being vastly underleveled, the protagonist is pumped. If he can defeat the dungeon boss, he'll earn enough to help his sister get her treatment as soon as possible. The protagonist leaps toward the dungeon boss. In his previous life, this boss was known as a mage's mortal enemy because only physical attacks worked against it. The protagonist increases his speed and attacks. However, the dungeon boss smiles because the protagonist's sword cannot penetrate its tough skin. The snake unleashes a venomous attack that melts the nearby rocks. The protagonist summons his item box. As part of the forbidden restriction skill allows him to store and retrieve items from a separate dimension, something he retained from his previous life. He summons a minotaur's axe. Suddenly, the dungeon boss attacks. The protagonist evades and counters with his new axe. However, after striking the boss, he realizes his stats are still too low. The blow fails to pierce the boss's skin. The dungeon boss retaliates, striking the protagonist and breaking his axe. Determined, the protagonist gives up on physical attacks and decides to try a different approach. As the snake opens its mouth, he rushes forward and uses Sonic Impact followed by Crimson Lotus Fireball. Thanks to the forbidden restriction skill, he can continuously use magic without depleting his MP. He plans to overwhelm the beast with magic, believing there must be a limit to how much it can absorb. The protagonist casts multiple Crimson Lotus Fireball spells at once. The fairy warns him that while he can use magic endlessly without affecting his MP, the strain will burden his body. The protagonist coughs up blood and looks exhausted, but he is determined to push past his limits. Losing his little sister would be far worse than any pain he currently feels. The dungeon boss begins to deteriorate, and the fairy says he just needs a little more power. With everything he has left, the protagonist summons the largest Crimson Lotus Fireball and hurls it at the boss. A system window appears, stating that the protagonist has leveled up and received Naga's Poison Blade, a weapon that poisons enemies over time. While resting against a rock, the protagonist looks satisfied with his victory over the boss, then collapses from exhaustion. The fairy says that, since he defeated the dungeon boss, he will now be teleported back to his world. In the next scene, the fairy appears teary-eyed. She accidentally input the wrong coordinates and teleported the protagonist just outside his home while he's still unconscious. As she hears someone approaching, she vanishes. The person walking by is Amamison, one of the protagonist's former party members. The protagonist suddenly wakes up, questioning where he is. He notices that he's in a girl's room. Amamison hears him and turns around, relieved that he's awake. She explains that she found him unconscious and looking pale, so she brought him back to her place. The protagonist understands the situation and thanks her. She says it's no problem but asks what happened to him. He explains that he went into a C-rank dungeon alone and was simply exhausted. Amamison is shocked by what he says. She then asks if it's okay for him to stay and eat her cooking. She wants to repay him for saving her life in the first dungeon they explored together. He agrees. She brings him some porridge and he thanks her for the meal. While eating, he asks about her parents. She tells him they were killed by monsters 7 years ago and that she witnessed it when she was little. That's one of the reasons she wants to become an adventurer, to look cool and to become stronger. The protagonist bows and apologizes to Amamison for saying she wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. He then tells her that if she's truly determined, he'll accept her as his disciple. She becomes teary-eyed. He says that the most important quality for an adventurer is courage. After hearing what she experienced and still wanting to become an adventurer, he believes she has what it takes. Still crying, she says she would love to be his disciple and thanks him. The protagonist tells her he'll make her a first-rate wizard. She replies that she's looking forward to it. In the next scene, the protagonist is at home, looking at all the items he received in the system window. He plans to sell some of the items and equip the rest. He feels grateful to have obtained a rare item, Naga's poison blade, since his axe broke. The protagonist then checks his updated stats. He is now level 70. His HP and MP are both 600. His attack is 280, defense is 187, stamina is 171, and agility is 178. The fairy tells him he's now considered a C ranker and that his growth is exceptional. The protagonist asks the fairy how much he earned after selling some of the items. She shows him that he now has 70 million yen. He's happy because he's closer to reaching the 500 million yen he needs for his sister's treatment. Just then, the protagonist's phone rings. The doctor on the line explains that they've been trying to reach him. His sister's health worsened a little while ago. The doctor says that if this continues, she doesn't have much longer to live. Shocked, the protagonist asks to speak to his sister. She says hello, and he asks her to stay strong just a little longer because he's found a cure for her. She smiles and says, "Okay, I'll be waiting." After hanging up, the protagonist emits a powerful aura and asks the fairy if clearing an A-rank dungeon would earn him 500 million yen. She says it's possible, but he may die trying. The protagonist, determined to save his sister, says he's ready to risk it all. The fairy warns him that it's suicidal to enter an A-rank dungeon with C-rank stats. The protagonist explains that he's running out of time, and the fairy, seeing his resolve, agrees to support him. The protagonist selects the A-rank dungeon. In the next scene, the fairy and the protagonist stand in front of a towering structure. The fairy says he'll need to reach the top floor to face the dungeon boss. As they approach the tower, a huge white lion monster appears, guarding the entrance. The fairy tells him he would normally need to be level 320 to defeat the lion, and questions how he plans to do it at only level 70. He replies that it's possible, if no other beasts or monsters interfere during the fight. If he can obtain a rare item from defeating the lion, conquering the A-rank dungeon will become easier. Suddenly, the lion launches an attack at the protagonist. In response, he activates a new skill called Tenma. Tenma is a spell that causes a significant leap in physical ability. Ideally, it uses a lot of MP, but because of the protagonist's forbidden restriction, he won't face any effects from using the spell. The protagonist kicks the lion beast in the face, launching it a great distance. While Tenma is activated, the protagonist can fight on equal terms with an A-rank opponent. However, he doesn't want to overuse magic and risk depleting his physical energy. A system window pops up and says the protagonist has unlocked a special quest. The goal is for the protagonist to defeat and tame the white lion. If he succeeds, he will gain a new ability, summoning a familiar. The protagonist knows that having a familiar would be very beneficial for completing dungeons. The protagonist and the white lion battle, exchanging blows. He observes a pattern in the lion's movements and exploits it with a barrage of explosive punches. The lion is now defeated. The protagonist orders the lion to lie down, and it obeys out of fear. The system window says the protagonist has cleared the special quest. Then, the protagonist absorbs the white lion into his body. Another system window appears, saying the protagonist has leveled up and acquired summoning magic, the familiar Nemia the white lion, and the white lion gauntlets. The protagonist has now gained 50 levels from defeating the white lion. After allocating skill points to get stronger, he is ready to enter the tower. The fairy tells the protagonist that she forgot to mention an important detail. Once he enters the tower, he cannot leave until he reaches the dungeon core on the top floor. She asks if he's sure he wants to proceed, and he replies yes. He's more afraid of losing his sister than facing powerful monsters inside the tower. They enter the tower, and the door seals shut behind them, preventing any exit. The fairy warns that undead monsters are approaching. The protagonist casts a new spell called Covert to erase his presence and then summons the White Lion. He instructs the White Lion to run around the floor to draw the undead's attention. Once they're all focused on him, the lion is to run to the center. The protagonist then casts a spell called Petrify to freeze the undead in place. Next, he uses Tenma to empower his demon blade, followed by Saint, which activates holy magic. With his enhanced sword, he slays the undead monsters. After the battle, he hugs Nemia, the White Lion, and tells him he did a great job. The protagonist levels up. The fairy is shocked that he was able to take care of all the undead within minutes. A system window appears, stating that the protagonist is now level 240. His stats are HP/MP 2300, Attack 745, Defense 615, Endurance and Agility 580. The protagonist acquires a large number of item drops. The fairy tells him that if he sells them, he'll earn over 500 million yen. However, he still cannot leave the tower until he reaches the top floor. Looking up, the protagonist notices the ceiling has no seals, so he considers blasting through each floor to climb faster. The fairy warns him that the tower's final boss is the Grim Reaper, and the recommended level to face it is 550. Despite this, the protagonist remains unfazed and says he'll figure something out. He opens his item window and begins searching for a spell that can counter ghost-type magic, knowing the Grim Reaper will likely rely on it. The protagonist activates the Tenma skill and blasts through the upper floors. The fairy warns him to be careful. They've reached the top floor, known as the boss arena, and the boss could attack at any moment. The Grim Reaper sits on his throne and summons undead to attack the protagonist. In response, the protagonist activates a skill called Perception Block, which causes him to appear as one of the undead so they won't attack him. The Grim Reaper observes this tactic and then casts a spell that instantly teleports him behind the protagonist. However, the protagonist has fought Grim Reapers in his past life, so he has experience with their abilities. Anticipating an attack, he activates a spell called Magic Eye of Wisdom, first form. This spell allows him to see the mana flow of his opponents, vital in this fight, since the Grim Reaper doesn't have a physical body. By tracking his opponent's mana, the protagonist can time his attacks accurately. A fierce exchange follows, with both the Grim Reaper and the protagonist evading each other's strikes. Eventually, the protagonist lands a hit, but due to the difference in strength, the Grim Reaper isn't seriously hurt. The protagonist continues to press the attack, striking repeatedly, but then forgets something critical. He's emotionally vulnerable. His sister is dying. The Grim Reaper exploits this weakness, throwing him off his game by using illusion magic to show disturbing images of his sister. Distracted and shaken, the protagonist takes a brutal hit. Grinning with confidence, the Grim Reaper capitalizes on the moment. He's using illusion magic to overwhelm the protagonist once again. Severely wounded, the protagonist sees his life flash before his eyes, memories of his sister flooding back. Just as he's about to be defeated, a system window appears, asking, "Would you like to lift the forbidden restrictions?" The fairy and the protagonist are at a loss for words, unsure of what's going on. The protagonist says to himself that he's willing to do anything rather than lose his sister. A system window appears, stating, "Forbidden restriction has been lifted, setting the forbidden archmage free." The protagonist is engulfed in power, and his eyes turn bright red. He kicks the Grim Reaper back with sheer energy alone. The Grim Reaper is injured, and the protagonist, now emotionless, summons a magical staff and activates a spell to destroy the entire dungeon, instantly killing the Grim Reaper. In the next scene, the protagonist leaps from the 7th floor of his apartment building, landing hard on the street with fierce determination in his eyes. He sprints toward the hospital. Meanwhile, doctors are gathered around his sister, trying to call him, urging him to hurry because she's close to passing away. While running at full speed, he buys an elixir and darts through the city like lightning. His sister loses consciousness just moments before he arrives. The protagonist is relieved that he made it back in time before she died. He removes her respirator, prompting the doctors to yell, asking what he's doing. Then, he gives his sister the elixir. Magical energy engulfs her body, and she awakens, fully healed. The protagonist, crying uncontrollably, tells her that she'll be fine now. Then he gives her a heartwarming hug. The next scene shows the doctor telling the protagonist that his sister is in perfect health and that he can't find any issues. All of her wounds have vanished. The doctor says he thinks she'll be able to be discharged tomorrow. The protagonist is overjoyed. The doctor then asks what the protagonist gave his sister, as she was healed from an incurable disease. The protagonist explains that he found a miracle drug called an elixir in a dungeon and learned it was a cure-all type of medicine. The doctor believes him and realizes that dungeons contain unbelievable items. In the next scene, the protagonist is walking outside the hospital beside his sister. She says she's feeling well and that there's no pain anywhere. She explains that she wants to walk home, even though it's a long distance. The protagonist agrees to walk the whole way with her. She hugs him excitedly. He asks what she would like for dinner, and she says she'd like him to cook his homemade curry. The protagonist agrees and says they'll need to stop by the supermarket. After shopping, they both arrive home with groceries. The sister notices the light is on in the restroom and wonders who's in there. When she opens the door, she sees the fairy. The fairy introduces herself as Sphere and assumes the girl is the protagonist's younger sister. Sphere explains that she is the protagonist's guide, helping him grow stronger. She tells the sister that she has saved her brother many times so he could earn enough money from the dungeons to heal her. The sister then thanks the fairy. They begin to get along, and while the protagonist appears a bit reluctant, he's also clearly relieved. The next scene shows all three of them eating together and enjoying their dinner. Then, a message appears on the television. There's an urgent announcement. A large A-rank dungeon has appeared in the middle of Tokyo. Clans are being recruited to clear it. A system window pops up and announces an emergency quest for the protagonist. The system requires the protagonist to clear the dungeon as compensation for lifting the forbidden restrictions. He has a 29-day time limit to complete the quest. The protagonist reflects on the events that unfolded during his fight with the Grim Reaper. He believes that the forbidden restriction has a safety mechanism that automatically activates its abilities whenever his life is in grave danger. The protagonist tells the fairy that the spell, which allowed him to grow exponentially stronger without any drawbacks, is probably the reason the system window has now issued this special quest as compensation. He believes that if he doesn't complete the special quest within the given time, the cost will be his life. Both he and the fairy agree that he must hurry and clear the dungeon. The next day, his sister heads off to school, and the protagonist tells her to have a great day. In the following scene, the protagonist visits the guild building to reevaluate his rank so he can become an A-rank adventurer. Although he has leveled up by training in private solo dungeons, he has no public achievements to prove his strength. The only way to raise his rank is to retake the guild's official exam. To pass the A-rank exam, one must clear a status evaluation and a practical battle test. The protagonist touches the measurement crystal and shocks the guild members. He is now level 240. While waiting to take the next part of the exam, he overhears two adventurers arguing. An A-ranker is blaming a smaller adventurer for being incompetent and for failing to clear a dungeon. The larger adventurer attempts to attack the smaller one, but the protagonist intervenes and stops him. The larger adventurer demands to know who he is and tells him to stay out of other people's business. However, the protagonist replies that he would have, if it hadn't turned physical. Just then, the A-ranker is summoned by the guild to meet with the receptionist. Before walking off, he angrily warns the protagonist that he'll let it go for now. The smaller adventurer thanks the protagonist and explains that the argument was about what happened to his clan, the Red Dragons. All the members of the clan were killed, except for the leader and himself. The A-ranker is putting all the blame on him, claiming that the tragedy occurred because of his poor judgment and leadership. The protagonist expresses sympathy, but then his name is called for the next exam. The smaller adventurer warns him to wait. The practical exam is a battle against an A-ranker. It's likely that the protagonist will have to fight the same A-ranker he just confronted. The smaller adventurer urges him to withdraw from the exam, but the protagonist confidently declines, saying he's much stronger than he appears. In the next scene, the A-ranker is surprised he has to face the protagonist after their earlier confrontation. He threatens to beat the protagonist so badly that he'll never be able to become an adventurer again. The practical exam begins, and an A-rank adventurer attacks the protagonist. The protagonist dodges, and the A-rank adventurer shatters the ground. The A-ranker uses a skill called gravity pull, drawing the protagonist toward him. He throws a punch, but the protagonist dodges and flips over the adventurer's body. The A-ranker activates his mana, and the protagonist responds by activating Tenma. The A-ranker overwhelms the protagonist with a flurry of attacks, but then the protagonist activates Eye of Wisdom to track and follow every move. He begins blocking the A-ranker's attacks. Suddenly, the A-ranker declares they'll fight to the death, but the guild announces that the exam is over mid-fight. The A-rank adventurer is furious when the protagonist says he's done fighting, explaining that he only participated in the exam to become an A-rank adventurer. As the protagonist walks away, the A-ranker vows to finish their fight someday. The guild congratulates the protagonist on achieving A-rank status and presents him with an updated guild member card. The protagonist leaves, wondering which guild clan he should join, or whether he should ask former teammates he's worked with. Suddenly, a crowd of people runs by, shouting that monsters have escaped from a dungeon. A giant snake approaches, and the protagonist looks on with determination, ready to fight.